Meanwhile, when his boss, George Turner, asked Tom to put together a team to develop a plan to expand the business in Europe, he was delighted. He wanted this in the worst way. He knew that this was the key to that elusive promotion he wanted and deserved. It had been his goal, but with the business straining against the limitations of domestic traffic, he wasn't sure what else he could do. He had considered looking for another job somewhere else, but had built so much here that he would lose a great deal. If he could pull this off, he could get the European operation for himself. He never discussed this with Nikki since she seemed to be quite happy with things as they were. She didn't work, and she took care of the two little ones, so she was content with his schedule. He was home most of the time, and he traveled very little. This pleased her, and she didn't see any reason to change it. He couldn't blame her. He made very good money, so they had no worries about finances and no pressures on them. He had spoken of the assignment with Harris, but didn't give him many details. He was not much into business, and Tom usually saw him nodding off if he discussed his job with him. He just told him that he would be working some late nights and that Phyllis was on his team. This interested Harris since he always had a thing for her. She was okay, just not Tom's type, but she was a hell of a good accountant, so he was glad she was on his team. He usually knew when he would have late meetings, but he tried to make Nikki believe they were random events, so he always called her on the day he was going to be late. This happened no more than 4 or 5 times, but she was getting tired of it already. At the rate they were progressing, he didn't think it would take many more meetings to resolve their issues and present their plan of action. He had put together a team of hardworking and loyal people, and he believed they had already achieved the basic milestones and building blocks and that Mr. Turner would be impressed. It looked like they could do this and have an operation up and going in less than 8 months, about 5 months ahead of estimates. At that rate, they would be seeing revenue by the end of the year. He had worked late last week, and he knew that Nikki was angry with him. He wasn't sure why now of all times she would be mad, but he knew it wouldn't be more than 1 or 2 more times, and they would be done. He let it go and they didn't discuss it. Monday, Nikki asked him if he would be working late this week, and he said that he would check. He already had a meeting scheduled for Wednesday, so he told her to tentatively plan on that. She said she wanted to go to her sister's place, and he agreed that would be a good plan. He confirmed it Wednesday, and she made plans to go. He hoped that this would be the last meeting they needed since they had made some real progress. Time would tell. Wednesday afternoon, he called a planning meeting, and they reviewed the program schedule they had drawn up that morning. He opened the meeting for discussion, and they found that they were all in agreement. They were ready to present their program. Tom called George Turner, and he agreed to hear them immediately. They made their pitch. They answered all questions and their numbers held up to scrutiny. Mr. Turner asked a few brief questions, which they answered, and he finally stopped. He looked at Tom and said, "This is outstanding work. You and your team have done the impossible. I want this ready to present to the board of directors Friday, but I can tell you now that it's a done deal. Tom has told me of each of your contributions, and you can all count on a bonus in your next paycheck. Tom, I want to see you after this meeting." After the rest of the team left, George offered Tom the promotion he had been after for so long. He told him that this put him over the top and that he was pleased to make Tom the newest VP of operational planning. Tom would report directly to him, and he could pick his own department members. It was what he had been waiting for. As soon as he could, he left to call Nikki. He put in the call to home, but there was no answer. Since it was already late, he thought maybe she was in transit between home and her sister's place, so he called her cell. She finally answered after about 4 rings. When she answered, he was too excited to notice anything unusual and simply told her to get home so that he could give her some good news and they could celebrate. She seemed surprised and didn't make a lot of sense, but he chalked it up to his exuberance. He hung up before she could ask too many questions. He wanted to wait until they were at home together to tell her everything. He talked to his secretary, assured her that she was a part of his new team, and told her he was gone for the rest of the day. She was pleased and said she was looking forward to the new job. With that, he left. He was home within 25 minutes and looked forward to taking Nikki out to dinner. If she hadn't already picked the twins up from her mother's, they were ready to go. She could change into that neat red dress that he loved and they could go someplace nice. He ran into the house, thinking to take a shower if Nikki wasn't back yet. The house was empty and Nikki was nowhere to be found. But when he looked in the garage and saw her car there, he was confused. He went into the kitchen and saw an envelope setting against his cup. His name was written on the envelope in big letters. He took it and went to the kitchen table to read it. It was a letter from Nikki to him, and it read as follows. Dear Tom, I know about your affair with Phyllis. I know that this is what you have been doing when you told me you were working late. I know because Harris was brave enough to tell me the truth. He saw you at the Holiday Inn, and he watched you take that Phyllis woman to her room. He was so broken up having to tell me this, but I made him. I don't know what I am going to do about our marriage. I know that you have hurt me terribly, but I still love you with all my heart. That's why I have decided to do with your best friend what you have already done to her. I am at this very minute at the Holiday Inn with Harris. By the time you read this, I will have made love with him at least once and perhaps more. I need to do this so that you will feel the pain I feel. If we both share the pain of betrayal, we can perhaps share the guilt of breaking our marriage vows. If we do, we can discuss moving forward together. I do not love Harris except as a friend, so he is the one I have chosen to help me make you see what cheating can do to someone. He and I will be home by 10 o'clock, and I expect you to wait for me so that we can begin to discuss our future. I do not want you to look for revenge against Harris for anything he has done. He is acting as my friend and as your friend. If you harm him in any way, we are through. Your loving wife, Nikki. He read the letter through twice, not understanding anything she said. What affair? He had never gone to the Holiday Inn, and he had never taken any woman to a room for any reason. Harris knew what he was doing, and he knew who Phyllis was. He couldn't have told her any of this nonsense, unless suddenly it all fell into place. Harris had often said that he wished he could have found Nikki first. He thought the world of her and said she was one of the sexiest women he had ever known. He always commented on her looks and even said that she was good even 7 months pregnant with the twins. He had always lusted after her, but knew that Tom would kill him if he so much as made a move on her. He and Tom shared background, and he knew his past. He would never cross Tom, or at least that's what he thought. Seems he was wrong. Seems as though Harris had grown tired of living. According to Nikki's letter, Tom had about 3 hours to wait unless he did something rash. He pulled out his cell phone and called Nikki. He let it ring until it went to voicemail. He called the desk at the Holiday Inn and asked for Harris Templeton's room. He was informed no such person was registered. He then asked for Nikki Preston's room. The clerk said she would connect him. Interesting that she booked the room, not Harris. He waited for 10 rings and then hung up. Maybe his phone call surprised her, and she was on her way home. That was probably the most likely, so he settled back in his chair and waited for them to come home. After about an hour, he began to wonder what could be keeping her. She knew he was home, and she knew he had read the letter. Would she wait for him to come to the Holiday Inn? That made no sense to him. He was just about to get his car and drive to the motel when the doorbell rang. He went to answer. 2 police officers stood at the door. They showed him their badges and asked, "Are you Mr. Tomas Preston? Do you have a wife by the name of Nicole Preston?" "I'm Tom Preston, and yes, my wife is Nikki Preston. Why are you here? Has something happened to her?" "Do you know a gentleman by the name of Harris Templeton?" "Yes, I know Mr. Templeton. Please, what is this about? Is my wife all right?" "Your wife has been in an automobile accident. She was a passenger in a car driven by Harris Templeton, and they were struck broadside by a truck while exiting the Holiday Inn motel downtown. This happened about an hour ago, and she is now at Memorial Hospital. If you would like, we can drive you down there, or we can follow you if you choose to drive." The shock was the final blow. He had been upset, and he was in a state of agitation before this, but this was too much. He staggered back against the wall and felt his face flush with heat, and his breathing became ragged. He felt hot, then cold, then nothing. He was numb. It was minutes before he again gained control. Time to remember that he was not alone and could reply to the officers. They had watched him and waited while he fought to regain some semblance of control. "Thank you. I would like to drive if you would wait for a minute while I get my coat and my cell phone. Do you know how she is?" He grabbed whatever he could reach and went out to the garage to his car. "We don't have that information. Would you mind if my partner rode with you downtown?" "No, that's fine. Let's go now." They left and made the trip in record time with a police escort. He answered the expected questions during the trip. Did he know Nikki was with Harris at the motel? Was this a surprise? Had he known about this affair before tonight? The usual questions to which he answered truthfully. He showed the officer the letter from Nikki, and he read it quietly without comment. He handed it back, and Tom put it in his jacket pocket. Hell of a way to find out about your wife and best friend. Guess it sort of makes you two even. Huh? Afraid not. My best friend lied through his teeth to get into my wife's pants. She chose to believe him rather than just ask me for the truth. This is the result. You need to remember that you can't take the law into your own hands. What he did is not a crime, so be careful what you do. Just a friendly word of warning. Understood, officer. I'll be careful. He let it go at that. He would definitely be careful. He had survived South LA by being careful. He knew how to get revenge and not have to pay the price for it. Harris also knew that. The trip to the hospital seemed to take forever, and when he got there, it was a hassle to find a place to park. The officer finally volunteered to park his car and leave the keys at the nurse's station, so he jumped out of the car and ran for the elevators. He knew she was in the emergency surgery ward on the 5th floor and punched the button and almost collapsed to the floor of the elevator during the trip. God, what if she had been killed or hurt seriously? What was he to do, and what about the twins? Too much, too soon, and none of it good. When he got to the nurse's station, she made him wait for a doctor before telling him what room Nikki was in. He yelled and raised a fuss, but she was adamant. He pulled at his hair and paced until a young doctor touched him on the shoulder. Are you Mr. Preston? Nikki Preston's husband? He seemed so young to be dealing in life and death. Yes, I am. What's happened to my wife? How is she? Is she okay? Panic. Let me talk to you before we go to her room. I have to discuss some things with you first, so you will understand what you are going to see. With that, he guided him to the lounge and gently forced him to sit. Your wife has had major trauma to her head. We took a hard look with x-rays and scans, and it appears that there is severe swelling caused by blunt force trauma, caused by contact with the side window. It appears that she slammed against the window, and that caused all of the significant damage. There was surprisingly little additional damage done. We will have to wait till the swelling goes down to see if there is any permanent brain damage. He paused for a moment, watching Tom to see if he was taking this information all right. She is in a coma right now, caused, as I said, by the swelling. We will have to wait until we know more. She is connected to a respirator, and we are giving her infusions of antibiotics and anti-inflammatories for the bruising. We will just have to wait. This was all he had to say, and motioned to Tom to follow him to her room. When he saw her lying there, pale, and with tubes in her nose and lines into her arms, he almost cried. She looked dead, not alive and vital as she was in real life. This was not real. It couldn't be. He just stared at her as he began to process what the doctor had told him and what had caused this abomination. As he looked at her, he felt the sadness leave to be replaced by anger. He felt cold and dead inside and felt nothing else except anger. Anger at both her and Harris for what they had done. Her guilt had caused this. Harris's duplicity had begun it. But now, he would end it. Through the shooting pain in his head and most of his body, Harris could see the lights overhead and thought he could hear voices coming from a speaker somewhere. He tried to open his eyes without much success, so he stopped for a time, trying to get some idea of where he was. As he stopped fighting, his memory began to return, and he could almost hear the crash of the truck hitting the car and the screams from Nikki just before she hit the window. He remembered now, with a vengeance. He was in an accident trying to beat Tom home. Oh my God. That was the plan, now certainly gone badly wrong. Tom probably knew the whole story. Suddenly, he remembered Nikki and blood flying everywhere. How was she? Did she make it okay? God, his head hurt. The pain was so intense that he surrendered to it and passed out. Hours later, he tried again to open his eyes, and this time he was successful. He was in a hospital room, and it appeared he was in traction and his head was in some kind of contraption so that he couldn't move it. He began to panic and tried to holler out, but felt a button in his left hand. He couldn't raise his arm, so he just pushed the button repeatedly until someone finally came into the room. Well, I see you're awake and back with the world. I'll get the doctor for you, and he can tell you all about it. Okay. This was from a face that briefly appeared in his line of vision. He must have fallen asleep again because an older man with white hair and a stethoscope around his neck awakened him. This was the doctor that had handled his case when he was admitted, or so he was told. You are a mighty lucky man, Mr. Templeton. Your injuries are serious, but none is life-threatening. You are in traction for a broken neck, which we had to pin, and you have some internal injuries that have been repaired. You'll live a normal life once you heal. I expect you to be good as new in about 10 weeks or so. Do you remember what happened? I remember pulling out of the Holiday Inn parking lot and seeing a truck. Did the woman who was with me survive okay? He held his breath for the answer. The woman survived, but she is in a coma. She had extensive head injuries, and we have no idea of the extent of the damages. The brain is swelled severely, and we have relieved as much pressure as we dare. We will just have to wait to see what happens. I will tell her husband that you are awake. He asked to see you when you woke. Is there any way that you could keep him out of my room, Doc? You wish not to see him? The doctor had a small frown on his face. No, I most certainly do not wish to see him. I want him kept away from me. Call the police if you have to. That won't be necessary. I'll leave word that he is not to be admitted to your room. Rest well, Mr. Templeton. With that, he left me alone to contemplate all I had learned since awakening here. It was pretty clear that Tom would have read the letter that Nikki left him, and he would have no idea that nothing had happened between him and Nikki. But he would also know that Harris had lied to Nikki about the affair and had set her up to cheat with him. That would be enough for Tom to do something to get back at Harris. It was necessary to keep away from Tom until he could get out of the hospital and away from here. Someplace where Tom couldn't find him. With that, he drifted off to sleep again to dream bad dreams. Tom remained at Nikki's side for about an hour before he finally rose and walked to the hallway. He did not stop at the nurse's station but walked down the hall and looked into the rooms as he passed them. In the fourth room, he saw what he was seeking. Harris lay there with his eyes closed. He was in some kind of traction device, but otherwise appeared to be better than Nikki. Tom walked quietly into the room and stopped at the foot of the bed. He just watched the sleeping man without speaking. Tom had been standing there, lost in thought when Harris woke up. Harris focused on Tom, and the fear that came on him was visible on his face. He fumbled for the call button and jammed his finger down on the button when he found it. He tried a few times to speak and finally got some words out. Tom, you have to know that nothing happened between Nikki and me. I wanted to, but she couldn't go through with it. She loves you too much, I guess. You can be mad at me since I was the one that lied just to get her in bed. But you know how I always felt about Nikki. It just got too much for me and I did something stupid. Please remember, nothing happened. Tom listened, but paid no attention to the words. He just watched the focus of his anger and hatred. After Harris finished speaking, he turned away without saying a word and walked back to Nikki's room. He was still sitting there watching her when the doctor came in to see him. He was agitated and wanted to know what Tom had said to Harris when he went into his room. He just looked up at him and said, "Nothing. I said nothing to him. Mr. Templeton has requested you not visit him. He doesn't want you in his room. Do you understand and agree?" He looked very upset, but Tom didn't much care. "I have no intention of seeing Mr. Templeton again here in the hospital. Please convey my words to him if you would. That should put his mind at ease." That was the truth, but Tom doubted it would give Harris any peace. He would see him again, but not until after Nikki woke up, if she did. The two of them owed him the truth, and he would have it. What he would do about it remained to be seen. Harris left the hospital after 3 weeks with a neck collar and an ADR. He made the doctors release him about 2 weeks earlier than they thought best, but he wanted out of that hospital. He wanted to be anywhere Tom wasn't. It was true that Tom had not made any attempt at talking to him after that first night he found him at the foot of his bed, just watching him, but he was scared of him just the same. Nikki's parents and sister had visited her, and her mother was there almost every day, but Tom had not been back to the hospital since that first night, or so the doctors said. He found that surprising since Nikki had not awakened from her coma yet. It had been just 23 days since the accident, and the doctors said that it wasn't unusual for a trauma-induced coma to last that long. They were not yet concerned. Tom, however, did not come back to see her. That was cause for concern to Harris, but he thought he could avoid any confrontation with Tom if he kept away from him.